Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Pod This, your weekly one-stop shop for all things politics. My name is Scott Nelson. I'm one of your hosts, and if you are a regular listener right now, you are wondering, where is Andy? Because he usually does this part. We are missing Andy Moore today. He is out. He has recently had a baby. He had a child a few hours ago. And when I say he, I mean his lovely wife, Katie. They are both doing well, but Andy is otherwise engaged today. So I am pinch hitting. So forgive any terrible things that happen with the soundboard, the music, or anything else. I am not alone, however. I am absolutely thrilled and privileged to be joined by a new host, a regular voice that you'll be hearing from hopefully nearly every week here on the show. I'm joined today by Miss Bailey Perkins.
Hello, everyone. Hey, listeners.
Hey, Bailey. How are you?
I am good. It's a Friday. So.
It is a Friday. Yes. Happy Friday to all of you, or happy, whatever day it is that you're listening to this. But we're recording on a Friday, and we're happy about that. So, Bailey, thank you so much for being here. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to run through the State of the State address. We're going to hit that not in a full text form, but a kind of topical review of the State of the State. Lots to hit there. Talk about what's happening in the legislature, and we're off to the races, man. The second session of the 57th legislature is underway.
Yes, it is.
Before we get to that, wanted to take just a minute, and Bailey, could you introduce yourself to us a little bit?
Yes, I am excited to join the Let's Pod This team to talk with you weekly about what's happening in our legislature and what's going on politically. I am born and raised Oklahoman. I'm from Lawton, proud Lawtonian. Went to Oklahoma City University and OU for grad school, so I am a Sooner through and through. I've worked with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, so that's where I got my footing in state policy in Oklahoma. Just finished my time in Congresswoman Horn's office in D.C., so I have federal experience, and so now I am back in Oklahoma after getting engaged about 5 months ago, now working with Oklahoma food banks on issues related to food security and poverty in our state. So I am excited to talk about what's going on in Oklahoma and keeping you guys abreast of things to note.
We are absolutely thrilled that you're here. I said last week when we announced you joining the show that you are way more qualified than either Andy or myself to talk about all this stuff. So we are excited to learn from everything you have to say. Before we get into the serious stuff, you got here today, and I mentioned that Andy and I usually will have a glass of whiskey while we drink the show, and you said, "Thank you. I'm a bourbon girl." I think, is that what you said?
Yeah, that's my drink of choice.
What do you have a favorite?
My go-to is Bullet because I know it's going to be consistent and smooth, and so that'll be my drink to sip on. So now I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur, but usually that's my go-to when I'm in a social setting. There's
Bullet is delicious. I've enjoyed many a glass of Bullet. And then you said you were in DC. Best restaurant you ate at while you were in DC?
Oh man. That is a tough question because there's so many options and great places to eat out there. One place that I did find that I crave often is a vegan soul food spot. Just hear me out, everyone. Vegan soul food called eLife. And they had what they called bourbon chicken made with jackfruit. And if I didn't tell you that it was jackfruit, you would have never known the difference. They have an incredible macaroni and cheese made with cashew milk or with chickpeas, and they both are just incredible. And so that's definitely something I'm craving, and I'm excited to taste next time I'm visiting DC again.
That sounds like something I need in my life. I need everything you just said. I need in my life. All right. So you mentioned soul food. You're a soul food fan? Is that is that your kind of favorite cuisine? Just one you really like? What do you I love food, so I love to ask people about food. So
Sure. Soul food is definitely what I grew up on. So I'm definitely always here for good pork chop or good mac and cheese and greens and good fried chicken. But I love seafood. And so that was one of my favorite things about being on the East Coast was being able to get fresh food often. So I'm always down for salmon or shrimp or crab meat or whatever it is.
so I think maybe I think maybe you and I need to get together and do a separate podcast just on food because I think we'd have a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. And shout out to JB Loves Food because he's going around the metro looking for different places to expose Oklahoma Cityans to on the great cuisine that we got around here. So absolutely.
I love it. Everybody check that out. Well, if we don't get to it, we'll do this all day. The second session of the legislature kicked off this week, and it started on Monday with Governor Stitt's State of the State address. And Bailey, we were talking before the show. Talk a little bit about why there's a State of the State address, like what it means and what the purpose is.
Yeah, so every year the legislature meets on that first Monday in February. And during that time, the legislature convenes and it has its formalities. And then it kicks off with the governor's State of the State address, which is a presentation of the budget from the executive office, but it's mainly a tool to discuss the priorities of the executive branch and the governor for that upcoming year. The legislature can use it as a metric to decide in what things to prioritize and talk about during the year and what types of bills will likely reach the governor's desk or have more likelihood of getting considered based on the priorities he's setting forth. So for two realms, it's important that we have a State of the State to hear what the governor's budget priorities are, but also knowing what issues will likely be at the forefront for this session.
Yeah, this is the governor saying like, all right, here's if I had my druthers, this is what I would like for you guys to focus on over the next 4 months. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Last year, the governor laid out several priorities in his State of the State address, and I think he got nearly all of them. I will say, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. I am less convinced that the governor is going to get all of his priorities met this year to the same degree that he did last year. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but I'm a little more skeptical. What do you think?
Well, this State of the State has a pretty broad and ambitious range of goals that the governor wants to accomplish. And they are things that may take time and they may, because they're very complex things. We're talking about, in some cases with agency consolidation, changing systems. And so that's something that may not necessarily happen overnight. And you have two bodies at the same time that have equal power, the House and the Senate, that also have their priorities. And so it's about how do you align the three branches to then figure out what's accomplishable. And so we'll see what is what the legislature is interested in doing this year.
Beautiful. Just a real quick kind of looking back on this first week of the legislature before we get into the State of the State. Bailey, was there anything that really jumped out to you here in the first week? They missed a day. They missed Wednesday at the Capitol because of the snow, but they were in session Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then for a little while this morning. I think the House was in session.
Sure.
Anything jump out to you?
For this week, there were a few bills that were heard in committees. And so I know that there was a bill focusing on homeless youth that came out of committee, which is a good thing. But then there was also a bill that went through committee and was heard on the House floor. So the first bill for this session related to removing licensing for or revoking licensing for doctors who perform abortion services. And so I know that connects to on February 5th, pro-life advocates had Rose Day. And I think that intersects with many conservative ideas, especially in this election season, wanting to see bills on abortion move forth. And so we saw that push happen during the first week of session.
Yeah, that's I can already tell like this session is going to give me a lot of migraines because we're in the middle of an election season. So I feel like the fact that we've got session and election season at the same time means we're going to see even more of these like kind of ideology bills, right? We're going to see more
bills, absolutely.
We're going to see more abortion and more guns and more, more of this, that, and the other. Yeah, the bill that this is, I think, House Bill 1112. This is a holdover bill from last year, right? So one thing to remember, and I think we talked about this briefly last week or the week before. So bills that were introduced last year but did not get heard, but also didn't like die, and maybe even bills that died. I can't remember the exact rules on that, but there are bills that can be held over from last session to this session, and they can be heard again. And so this was a holdover carryover bill from last year that passed off the House floor this week on a party line vote. I want to say it was 21-72, I think, something like that. It's a bill it's an anti-abortion bill that says that it directs the Oklahoma State Medical Board of Licensure and Supervision to remove the license of any doctor who performs an abortion with exceptions for the life of the mother. One bill that I was actually really encouraged by this week, this is House Bill 3024, sponsored by Representative Carol Bush. This passed the House Judiciary Committee. This is a bill that would remove the statute of limitations on the prosecution of child trafficking and sexual crimes against children. So this passed out of the House Judiciary Committee and will be headed next to the floor. I don't know when it's on the calendar, but this I think is a really good bill by Representative Bush, and hopefully that makes some progress.
Well, and this was a great opportunity to plug that if you want to follow when bills are going to be on committee agenda, they're updated regularly on oklegislature.gov, or if you want to look specifically on a House page, okhouse.gov or oksenate.gov. You can click those pages and see what's going to be heard either in committee that week or on that day, or what's going to be heard on the House floor that week as well.
You any bills you're following, Bailey? You're doing work with the food bank on child hunger, right?
Yes.
So I assume you have like a dozen bills or dozens of bills that you're following?
Sure. So we're looking at different pieces of legislation as session goes on. One of the challenges is that it's figuring out which bills will move through the process and which ones won't. There are well over 2,000 bills that are being considered this session. And I heard a statistic that only about 17% of bills last session actually made it to the governor's desk. And so I always describe this process as the litmus test of going through the committee process, going through the floor, and then actually getting to the governor's desk for signature. And so we're looking at what are ways that at the food banks, how can we feed the line, meaning how do we serve more Oklahomans who are hungry in the state through the work that we do with food distribution, working with our pantries and soup kitchens and other community partners who are serving food to Oklahomans in need. And then how do we shorten the line, meaning how do we ensure that Oklahomans have the necessary economic tools and quality of life to be able to be self-sufficient. And so we're looking at things like the earned income tax credit. There's a few bills out there that would add refundability to the earned income tax credit. The challenge is that a few years ago, the legislature was in a very bad place with the state budget and needed sources of revenue in order to maintain a balanced budget, because Oklahoma is required to have a balanced budget. And one of the places where they got revenue from for that balanced budget is through the earned income tax credit, making it non-refundable. So once your tax liability, if you were eligible to receive that credit, once your tax liability was covered, then you didn't get that money back during tax season. And so there are a lot of Republican and Democratic legislators who care about the earned income tax credit and want to see that refundability because it's known as a strong anti-poverty tool to make sure that families are able to get that tax relief and get that extra money in their pocket that they could dump back into the economy for the things that they need. And so that's one bill that we are following and hope that the legislature will act on. We're also making sure that our programs are maintained and protected, like SNAP, ensuring that we don't add any barriers to programs that would keep people from getting that assistance that they need. And then we're also looking at how do we ensure that Oklahomans have access to health care. So we're excited to see movement and conversations around Medicaid expansion to make sure that more Oklahomans can get health access.
Here is my response to that. Oh man, I messed it up. There we go. I'm running the soundboard for the first time today, but that was the applause. No, I think those are all. I mean, all things that I'm watching as well. Certainly, someone who's concerned about healthcare and works in healthcare, and also just concerned about fairness in government and good government. EITC, I think, is huge. Obviously, Medicaid expansion. We're gonna talk a whole lot about healthcare in a minute, and what the governor had to say about that in his State of the State. But shall we? What do you think? Shall we? Just get into it and start talking about State of the State?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So the governor gave his address on Monday. It's about 45 minutes long. Our original plan was to kind of go through it like line by line, play the audio, and then kind of jump in. But with the length of the speech and our verbosity, even without Andy, we thought that might end up being a 3-hour podcast. So we're going to go through and do kind of a topical review, talk a little bit about what the governor said, what we think it means, what the implications are in terms of policy, as well as in the legislative session. Sound good?
That sounds great.
All right, I'm have you kick it off with criminal justice. What can you kind of briefly summarize what the governor said about criminal justice, and then what your thoughts are about the future and kind of ongoing efforts of those proponents of criminal justice reform here in Oklahoma. Last year, the governor signed into law an incredible bill, had been years in the making, commuted the sentences, I think, of like ultimately resulted in the release of like 456, I think, folks from prison, the largest commutation and release in, I think, anywhere in American history on a single day. So a lot of progress, but a lot of work still to be done. What can you tell us about that, Bailey?
Sure. And it's really great to hear that the governor is passionate about criminal justice reform, because one of the pieces that's important to note about the State of the State is that, again, it's where the governor discusses what his priorities are and the things that he cares about, and criminal justice is clearly one of those areas that he wants to champion. Oklahoma, even with there are about 2,000 commutations that have happened, over the past year, and even with that, Oklahoma still is number 2 in the incarceration of men and women in the state, and in across the country, and so it's important that beyond just those commutations, there's additional work and focus on areas that will help reduce the prison population as well as decrease recidivism. And so I think the governor is committed to addressing both. I heard the executive director of the Pardon and Parole Board speak, and he mentioned that somewhere between 25% to 75% of those who were commutated have a likelihood of returning back if we don't have the systems and supports in place to make sure that they have what they need to adjust back into our communities and become self-sufficient. And so the governor mentioned wanting to get $1.5 million into women in recovery, talked about wanting to invest into county to community safety investment fund, and then trying to get money back into programs that will help Oklahomans who are facing addiction, and programs that are helping those who were formerly incarcerated acclimate back into communities. And so there's also a lot of focus, even within the legislature, on sentencing reform and bail reform in other areas. And so we'll see as the legislative session plays out, which of these areas are able to formulate into law to then further movement in criminal justice.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I have any number of disagreements with the governor on policy, but I think that he is very much committed to pursuing a criminal justice reform in an aggressive way. You mentioned bail reform. I think bail reform is huge. It seems like bail reform is maybe a fairly heavy lift politically, right? There are definitely some interests in the legislature that kind of want to keep the bail system the way it is for a variety of reasons. But I think bail reform would be huge. I think also we're going to talk about agency consolidation here in a minute, but one of the other things the governor mentioned was consolidating the Department of Corrections with the Pardon and Parole Board.
Yes.
And trying to streamline that process. So right now there's the Pardon and Parole Board, which makes recommendations for people to be pardoned and paroled from the correction system, but the Department of Corrections is a totally separate entity, and the governor wants to have those both under the same roof.
Yeah, and corrections covers all of our state prisons and covers how our correctional employees are hired and their salaries. And so everything regarding our state prison system falls up underneath our corrections agency, Department of Corrections.
So anything else that stuck out for you on criminal justice reform?
Well, we'll say that he has an interest of increasing salaries for those who are working in corrections, which is huge because they are grossly underpaid, and that contributes to some of the challenges that we're seeing with the revolving door of employees going in and out of the Department of Corrections, and even just maintaining public safety within that space. And so I'm encouraged to hear that there is an interest in raising salaries for correctional employees, and then a focus on gainful employment, because now that people have been released from commutations, the next step is ensuring that we're holding our business community accountable in ensuring that those who have been released from prison have opportunities to get quality jobs and to get the skills training that they need. And so that seemed like an area that the governor was interested in working through as well. And so I'm hopeful that will remain a priority for him. Absolutely.
All right, next up we've got agency consolidation. So the governor spent a lot of time talking about how, I mean, he kicked the speech off by saying in his year in the governor's mansion, he's realized that the government in Oklahoma is too big and too broken. And yes, that is a quote. And one of the ways that he wants to address this is by taking agencies that have previously operated in quote separate silos and putting them under one roof. You know, he mentioned Department of Corrections. He also mentioned and the Pardon and Parole Board. He's also talking about consolidating like the Healthcare Authority, the Department of Health, and the Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services, trying to put all of those under one roof. Several other areas of state government that he wants to consolidate. And the thought being that by putting people that do similar things under one roof, you can potentially like decrease your costs. You don't maybe you don't require as much manpower. You require fewer resources. You can utilize economies of scale and improve efficiency. This is another area that, again, I am cautiously optimistic about this. This is something that it seems like in Oklahoma we go through periodically, like about every 15, 20 years, like we'll consolidate a bunch of agencies, and then 15, 20 years later, it seems like that's not working. So we'll break them up again. And like we go back and forth. I understand why this looks like an attractive thing to do. I understand why, particularly someone who's not used to working in government and comes from the business world, this seems like the logical next step. I'm skeptical of actually making it work.
Well, the concern is that for many who are engaged in government is looking at what do the details look like of consolidation? Is it just administrative consolidation? Is it consolidation of all of the functions of the agencies? What becomes prioritized, what isn't? And so there's a definite need for details because consolidation doesn't automatically equate to savings. And so that cost benefit analysis is essential to understand what will it take to integrate all of the agencies, and is this the best way to bring efficiencies and to maximize services in the state. And so that's something that has to be considered beyond looking at numbers in a spreadsheet, because these are agencies that work with hundreds and thousands of Oklahomans on a daily basis.
And presumably they exist for a reason. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially when it comes to the efforts and the work in the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. And so the director of that agency, or the commissioner, who was there for
like 12 years, I
I
think,
believe
right?
so, and is regarded as an expert in this space and a champion for mental health, has resigned from that agency. So one concern is, who are you putting in positions to lead the agencies, and what does it look like for the agencies in setting priorities and ways to meet need in Oklahoma? Because when you look at all of our health outcomes, Oklahoma is at the bottom of the bunch, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort and investment to move Oklahoma in the top 10 when it comes to healthcare. And so this is definitely one of those areas that I don't see happens overnight. It's going to take a lot of thoughtfulness and planning if it's going to happen and be done in a way that's going to be beneficial for Oklahomans.
That is the perfect segue, I think, into talking about healthcare, which was a big topic of the governor's speech, not just in terms of agency consolidation, but the governor formally rolled out. Now, he had made this announcement in some capacity earlier, about 5 days earlier. He made the announcement last week in Washington with officials from the Trump administration and the director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. But the state of the state is when the governor really first started talking about Sooner Care 2.0, which is his healthcare plan that he wants to use to, quote, expand Sooner Care, expand Medicaid, and bring federal dollars back to Oklahoma, but also offer the state more flexibility. Now, let me just say, because if I don't say this at the outset, I'm going to go off on a tangent and bitch about this for the next 45 minutes, but we're going to talk a lot about healthcare. You guys, regular listeners, know that we have been tantalizingly dangling in front of you for months now a healthcare series, and we have started work on that. We've recorded at least one episode. We're going to have to go back and redo several parts of it because of the announcement the governor made. And one of the reasons that we've been kind of putting our voices on tape, as it were, is because we were waiting to see what the governor offered, and now we have that. And so I think we have a kind of a launch point here to discuss healthcare in Oklahoma. Essentially what the governor has suggested is rather than doing what we would call straight Medicaid expansion or clean Medicaid expansion, which is expanding Medicaid to everyone who's at 138% of the poverty level or below. This is what was envisioned of the Affordable Care Act from the Obama administration. It's a scenario where eligible folks would be automatically covered. The federal government would match spending at a 9-to-1 ratio, so 90 cents on the dollar for every dollar that the state spends. Rather than do that, the governor would like to expand Medicaid in Oklahoma using a block grant program. So essentially what this means is right now, for eligible beneficiaries for Sooner Care and Medicaid, the federal government, for many of them, spends about $1.50 to $1.75 for every dollar that the state spends. Okay, and under Obamacare, those newly eligible folks, the match is 9-to-1. So the federal government covers 90% of the costs. Okay, in a block grant, rather than continuing with that federal match system where when, like, for instance, the economy is good and not as many people need Medicaid, the program costs less. And then when the economy tanks and more people need Medicaid, the program costs more. So it's a cost structure that, like, the structure doesn't change, but the actual dollars vary from year to year. Moving forward, the federal government would give Oklahoma
A set amount.
a fixed amount, a block of money. The reason that the state would do this is because it would purportedly offer the state some flexibility in terms of how it administers those benefits. And now, in my opinion, what that really means is it would let the state do things like have work requirements and drug testing and all these other things. The reason that the governor says that he felt like this is the answer for Oklahoma is it frees the state up from some of these requirements that the federal government places on how you spend Medicaid dollars. Number one. Number two, he says it would let Oklahoma be more innovative in terms of how it determines coverage and who gets covered and the criteria that they have to meet. Three, if the state saves money under this program, the state gets to keep a portion of those funds and spend them however they want to. So that's attractive. But the catch is, moving forward, that pot of money is indexed to inflation. And other than that, it doesn't change.
And we know that the cost of healthcare increases and changes over time. And so it does not offer that level of flexibility
at
to
a
adjust.
rate significantly greater than inflation.
Absolutely.
Healthcare costs rise at sometimes 2 or 3 times the rate of inflation. So the concern from some of us, and I am one of us, the concern from some folks is that a block grant over time is going to significantly decrease the amount of money that is available to take care of the folks in Oklahoma who need this insurance coverage. And so the only way that you make that money up is either the state has to come up with the difference or people start losing their benefits.
Or the people who will receive the benefits will then have to pay higher premiums out of pocket. And we know that the population who is being served through a Medicaid expansion doesn't have the means to pay for premiums. It could turn into a barrier for those who need care.
Right. And I think proponents of this strategy will point to so-called welfare reform from the 1990s. So this was something that happened in the Clinton administration. So when Bill Clinton was president and there was a Republican Congress, they significantly changed parts of the and I hate even using the term welfare, because, like, there's this conception out there that there's a whole bunch of people that are, like, getting checks from the government, and that's just not true. This is specifically talking about a program called TANF. And Bailey, I would bet that you know more about this than I do, but as I understand it, the way that essentially what they did in the 90s is they converted TANF to a block grant program. And what has happened, and on all the kind of same benefits were touted, that, this will improve flexibility and yada, yada, yada. But really what's happened is now it's been 20 years. The pot of money hasn't changed because of inflation. The money is worth significantly less than it was then. There's also a lot more people that need those benefits. And so the end result of so-called welfare reform in the 90s hasn't been to reform welfare. It's just been that a lot of people who needed benefits lost them. And I think
so it actually limits, when we talk about adding those type of block grants onto Medicaid, it actually limits the state's ability to adapt to needs in times where if we have a poor moment in the economy, and the economy crashes and we have more people who need or who lose their insurance through their business and they need access through Medicaid expansion, then we're putting people in a position to where either you'll lose benefits or the coverage will be minimal due to the limited scope that we're putting over on block grants.
Right. And then the other thing about this, and this is the other, it may not even be illegal, right? Like, part of the statutes that govern Medicaid say that if you're going to change the way it's funded, if you're going to grant like a waiver to a state, which is how this would have to work, if you're going to grant a Medicaid waiver, the state has to be changing their program in such a way that it furthers the goal of providing insurance to people who need it, right? Like improving healthcare outcomes and providing increasing access. And there's really not much, it's really hard to make a case, a data-driven, evidence-based case that that's what converting to a block grant does. So it's like, one, it may not work. 2, it may not even be legal. 3, there's a referendum on the ballot to take straight Medicaid expansion and put it in the Oklahoma Constitution. If that passes, then Sooner Care 2.0 is all for naught. And 4, I left my crystal ball glasses at home today, so I can't tell you what the future holds. But there is an election in November, and I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that there might be a new president in January. There might not be, but there might be. And if there's a Democratic president, they will rescind this waiver. And any time, money, and other resources that the state of Oklahoma has spent on developing this program will be down the toilet. So
it's important to note that this is the first time that the waiver will be used in this way. In previous efforts to allow states to do this type of block grant with Medicaid, it's been struck down. And so it'll be interesting to see on how Oklahoma will do this, and even implementing work requirements for that matter.
I mean, yeah, work requirements have been struck down by the courts all over the country. The Trump administration says that they think they're on solid legal footing granting this waiver. When this program, when the waiver is granted and we actually start trying to enact the program, there will be a lawsuit. It's going to go to court. I guess the bottom line is
it's also happening through a executive order, which will be unique to see on how this plays out and what it actually looks like.
Yeah, I think the bottom line for me is on healthcare in terms of the State of the State address. The governor laid out a lot of things. It's not at all clear to me how many, if any of them, are going to happen for all those reasons. But moving on, before we get too bogged down, too much in the weeds. We love to be in the weeds here on the show. That's kind of our the weeds is kind of our happy place. But it is a Friday afternoon after all. So. Criminal justice reform, agency consolidation, healthcare. Another area, Bailey, that I know that you are. I think I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to say passionate, unless passionate is the right word. Is transparency in budgeting. That's something that the governor talked about that you, I think, felt strongly about. What are your thoughts on what he had to say about transparency in budgeting?
I think if Andy was here, he would definitely speak a whole lot about that, because his organization, Freedom of Information Oklahoma, is very focused on governmental accessibility to information and documents. And so the governor has championed making information accessible for the public to understand where their dollars are going. And so there is an effort by the governor, I believe it's called the
Online checkbook.
That's what it is, where you can go online and see where dollars are going. And so there is this conversation about making sure that the public knows where their dollars are going and how their dollars are being spent. What is not being talked about in this state of the state, which he noted as well, is that there's not a conversation about bringing in additional revenue. And so the conversation is, how do we change things within the system to save money? And how do we even save money over time? And I know that we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But in order to do a lot of things, for example, if we're going to raise salaries for correctional employees, where does that money come from, right? If we're going to continue investing in teachers, where do those dollars come from? And so I'll be curious to see over session what will be accomplishable with a flat budget over time. So it's great to have transparency, but it'll be interesting to see what happens over time with limited resources.
Bailey, you said revenue. That sounds to me like another word for taxes.
Oh, man.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but this here's America, and we hate taxes. Taxes are the devil.
Not necessarily. I think Americans, it's an American value to be a taxpayer, right? Americans take pride, and that's a talking point, whether you're Democrat or Republican, is I'm a taxpayer. You hear that often, giving value back to the taxpayer, right? You hear that rhetoric all the time. And so when we connect what benefits are going back to each of us as those living in this great country, of what comes back to us because of our investment in tax dollars, people are able to see that,
Yes.
in investments into services, because they want services, they want programs, they want to see things improve with mental health in Oklahoma. They want to see education improve and better investments in our public school system. They want to see things improve with corrections and see people have more resources to get jobs. So when you talk about those things and programs and less in taxes, you see that people's values really are about our tax
that's the thing, right? Like everybody wants the best school system in the world. They want the best corrections department in the world. They want the best roads in the world, but all that stuff costs money. And at the end of the day, there's like, I know it sounds crazy, but like there's only so much fraud, waste, and abuse that you can cut out, right? Like most agencies in Oklahoma over the last 10 years have had their budgets cut by 40%, right? This happened because of the oil crash. It also happened because of profound reductions in the tax rate, both the income tax rate and other tax rates that we have in Oklahoma.
Well, and the governor mentioned about the need to diversify our tax base in the economy. He mentioned it briefly and then moved on. But that is an important conversation that needs to be fleshed out, is what does a diversified economy look like, and how do we bring in more revenue that will help to invest in these important services, but not on the backs of working Oklahomans.
Right. And his like refrain, I think, seemed to be we don't need more taxes, we need more taxpayers. And like that he said that several times in the speech. And like I get that, and I'm a fan. Yes, bring more taxpayers, like bring companies to Oklahoma, like diversify our economy. But I also think at the end of the day, for me, it's hard to escape the fact that like we slashed our tax rates, and because of that, we have slashed our state agencies, and they got an infusion, 18-ish months ago with the passage of the House Bill 1010XX that, increased the gross production tax and made some other changes, but we're still behind. And like you're talking about, like raises for corrections officers, where it's supposed to, everybody's talking about passing a COLA increase this year, cost of living adjustment for state retirees. We're talking about increasing salaries for teachers. We're talking about, we're going to talk about tribal gaming here in a second. The governor's wanting to take $139 million from the rainy day fund to pay for education,
on top of sustaining services as they are currently going. Right.
It just, I get, we talk about this stuff all the time. I talk to lawmakers about it, and I talk to citizens about it, and they're like, well, I mean, I agree, this stuff's important, but we just can't afford it. And it's like, no, but we really can. Like, we really can afford it. You just have to choose to spend the money.
Well, we have to, if we really want to be that top 10 state, we have to make those necessary investments on the front end so we can spend less on the long term, especially when it comes to conversations about healthcare, for criminal justice and other things. You have to invest in those. And I've heard different governmental leaders talk about investing in that preventative and interventions so that we can spend less over time. And one point that I do want to mention when we talk about who is the taxpayer, it's everyone living in the state of Oklahoma. Yes. Everyone is paying that sales tax, right? When they go buy their groceries, or when they're purchasing whatever service, because there are some sales tax on services, or whatever the need is. So even our most vulnerable Oklahomans are paying a higher share of their earnings and what they're bringing in into our tax system. And so everyone is a taxpayer in Oklahoma.
If you spend money in Oklahoma, you pay taxes.
Absolutely.
All right. Lastly, or maybe next to last, we're going to talk about the budget here a little bit, but tribal gaming. So I mentioned at the outset that I'm not sure if the governor is going to get everything that he asked for from the legislature this year. And this is one area where I am very skeptical. So, and jump in here whenever. Essentially, we talked about this at length on the show, but a brief recap. So, Oklahoma tribes, many tribes operate casino gaming operations. They pay fees to the state off of their revenues from those gaming operations. The governor said last year that he feels like they don't pay enough. They should pay more. They should pay a rate that's more reflective of what tribes and surrounding states pay. The tribe said,
well, he phrases it as modernization
Yes.
of the compacts.
yes. And he said that, his kind of opening salvo in this discussion was to say that the tribal gaming compacts, which are the organizations that govern how much the tribes pay the state, among other things, that they govern how they operate their casinos. He said that they expired at midnight on December 31st, 2019. The tribe said, no, they don't. They go on as long as certain conditions are met. They automatically renew. Those conditions have been met, so the compacts automatically renew. The governor said, no, they don't. The tribe has filed a lawsuit. And so now this is all tied up in federal court. The newest development has been that the governor has asked the court to basically say, while we're sorting this out, we basically want you to say that they can't operate Class 3 games, and issue an injunction or a stay. I don't know technically which one it is, but he wants the court to say they're not allowed to conduct these gaming operations while we're hashing this out. That would cost the state about $150 million because that's what the state would expect to get from the tribes.
And those dollars typically go into public education.
Yes. And so the governor has said, while we are putting those funds on pause, while we're putting those gaming operations on pause, he wants the legislature to take $139 million from the rainy day fund and cover that expense. He also wants the legislature to put $100 million into the rainy day fund. And he also wants to have a constitutional amendment to change the cap of the rainy day fund. So he wants to say that we're going to save more and we're going to make a savings deposit, but then we're going to make a bigger savings withdrawal. It's a very kind of confusing situation.
In a time where we are in a budget neutral year.
So that's the other thing is the budget this year is flat, essentially, right? There's no revenue growth. And honestly, those flat budget numbers are based on revenue estimates from December when West Texas Intermediate crude oil was trading at $54 a barrel, and now it's down to $50. So those budget numbers, like that number may come down, and we may actually be looking at less money than we were looking at a year ago. So it's not clear to me that what the governor is asking the legislature to do as it relates to tribal gaming compacts is going to happen. Of note, Speaker McCall actually came out last week. Someone asked him, like, what do you think about this dispute with the governor of the tribes? And Speaker McCall said, I think it's pretty clear that the compact's automatically renewed. Like, and this is all, a big much ado about nothing. If you want a great kind of background into why we're having this discussion in the first place, NonDoc has an article that talks about the invalidation of the dispute clause, the arbitration clause in the compacts originally. That clause was thrown out by a federal court in 2017. So the fact that clause is gone is why this whole sticky situation has unfolded the way that it has. Folks in the governor's office would tell you that they're not really after the money. They're after the reinstatement of that clause or something like it. But at least to me, it's not at all clear what's going to happen with the governor and the tribes.
And I believe that February 12th is the day that essentially that check is supposed to come in. So we'll see what happens and whether the governor accepts those dollars or if we have to go into the rainy day fund to cover the potential hole that could be there. And so it's fascinating that this is a battle during legislative session that's outside of the legislature. And so I definitely encourage listeners to check out that NonDoc article to get the background and just continue reading your trusted news sites on what happens from here, because there isn't a legislative fix to this, even though it's happening during legislative session.
Yep, for sure. Well, Bailey, anything else from the state of the state? Anything else that the governor threw out there that we should discuss today?
The governor also talked about public education.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do it.
Sure. I think there's a lot of concern. The throughout the education community of what it means to add additional dollars to, and I'm going to mess up the name of the scholarship fund.
So he wants to
Equal opportunity
tax credit, right?
Yeah.
So the governor he talked about adding like $12 million to education, but he talked about increasing the tax credit available to the. It's basically, if you donate money to this fund that provides like scholarships for kids to go to private school, right, is the deal. That's capped right now at $5 million, and he wants to increase it to $30 million. A lot of people are very upset that he proposed increasing funding to public school by $12 million, but increasing the cap on the scholarship fund to $30 million.
So it's another question of, during this time where the budget is going to be tight, where those funds come from. Do you pull dollars from public education and pull them into the private sector when there still is a whole lot of need for our public schools, in reducing classroom sizes and increasing salaries for our professional staff who support teachers but make very low salaries. And so there's still so much need. And even with teacher pay, that while we're moving in the right direction, we're still not quite there in ensuring that teachers have that adequate salary. And so there's still a lot of conversation and questions around what that looks like and where those dollars would come from.
100%. So, everyone, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much to Neil for being here. Thank you so much to Bailey for being here for your first day today. Can't wait to have you as a regular host with us every week. Everybody, don't forget to subscribe and rate Let's Pod This on Apple Podcasts. That helps other people kind of find out about us and become better informed. Remember, you can connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at Let's Fix This OK. Me, Scott, I am at SC Melson. Bailey is at Bailey M. Perkins. And Andy is at Andy OKC. You can also like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Let's Fix This. Our website is letsfixthisok.org. And there you can sign up for our newsletter. You can read our blog, find resources and details about any upcoming events. You can also make a donation or sign up to sponsor a podcast episode, which would be just awesome. Our podcast is edited and produced by me and Andy, and now Bailey as well. And Let's Pod This is a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network. Our theme music is Rhino Funk by the artist So Down. And Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization who strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans to engage with their government. We encourage you to get involved in any way that you can, and always remember that decisions are made by those who show up. See you next time, guys.